We hold these truths to be self evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Thomas Jefferson, The American Declaration of Independence. Happy 250th birthday to all Americans in the United States and around the world. Today is a momentous occasion. I was lucky enough to be alive to celebrate the bicentennial in 1976, and now to celebrate the 250th birthday, the semi-quincentennial. I can only hope that my sons, who are now in their mid 20s, will have the same opportunity to celebrate the 300th birthday, the tricentennial, with their children that I had with them. I had the privilege to have a conversation with a MACV-SOG Vietnam War veteran, Mr. John Stryker Meyer. I could not think of a more fitting day than today to post that episode. Those were extraordinary men going on missions where teams before them literally vanished from the face of the earth, never to be seen from nor heard from again. Unfortunately, for all Vietnam War veterans returning from Vietnam, they did not get the respect they deserved. I'm proud to say that we as a country have done a far better job since then of showing American service members the respect they deserve. One final note: we need to continue the search for all of those missing in action. The search should never end until all American service members are repatriated in the United States of America. Happy 250th birthday, and God bless America. Welcome to the Casual Shooters Podcast, your premier podcast for the casual shooter. I'm your host, David Riddle. I've had a few special episodes in the past. I haven't had one in a while, but today's a special episode. Very special episode. My guest today might be the oldest guest I've had on, and probably the most experienced combat veteran I've ever had on and ever spoken with. And I've spoken with guys who I was friends with who were at Fallujah, in the major battle there. So that's saying something. But this gentleman was part of a group that is literally legendary, and probably put Green Berets on the map. If you would, join me in welcoming to the show the distinguished Mr. John Stryker Meyer.
Wow, thank you, Dave. I saw what your fellow Marines and troops did at both Fallujah battles, and I'm glad I missed those battles, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I had a guy that I served with at the sniper school. He was a first sergeant with the unit in Fallujah, and he was telling me some stuff, and I was like, wow, it was very, very intense. Not unlike what you guys experienced. So, and I don't even know if I mentioned in the intro. I may have to redo the intro altogether, but you were with MACV-SOG in Vietnam running missions across the border.
Yes, sir, for about 19 months, two tours of duty.
Yeah, that's pretty intense in itself. John, what I want to do is I want to open this up with some icebreaker questions.
Sure.
Kind of get, even though we've been on the phone now for about an hour or so, trying to figure out I think we're having technical difficulties on both ends here. But kind of get the hard drive spinning and started on a lighter note. And with that, I'm going to ask you, what's your favorite movie?
Oh, that's hard. There's a few, of course, but The Longest Day is right near the very front. When that came out, I'll never forget it. My dad told me, get your buddies and we're going to go watch this movie. And I go, Dad, this is ancient history. This is 1962. I said, World War II ended 17 years ago. That's old history. He goes, that's why you got to see it. So my dad took me and my buddies to the movie. Holy smoke, what a movie. And to this day, I still go back and watch it once in a while with some of the scenes that capture that moment, particularly like with St. Mary Glees, 82nd, 101st Airborne men going in. Gosh.
Did you see Saving Private Ryan?
Oh, yeah. Yes, sir. We saw that when it came out to theaters, and excellent production. And that whole scene, that opening scene on the beach where you see some of our men getting literally gunned down by the Germans, it was very emotional, for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah, that seemed to have a big impact on the veterans that were still alive from that time.
Absolutely.
Okay. Now I know you've read a book or two because you've written several books. So I know you've read books. What's your favorite book?
Oh, gee. Um, there was a book that came out in the, I think it was the early 80s. It was called The Bodyguard of Lies. And it was one of the first books that had details on the secret, like the British effort to break the code, and with some of the ramifications, like it talked about decisions like Churchill. They knew that Covenant or Coventry was going to get bombed, and they wanted to alert the people of Coventry. And Churchill said no, because if we alert them, at some point the Germans will want to know, how did we alert them before they got bombed? And the whole thing with the Enigma and all the stories that were in it. So that's one of my favorite. Of course, the all-time favorite is the Green Berets. I had flunked out of college in 1966, and I knew I was going to get drafted. I read the book. It was like a godsend. I read the book and said, okay, if I'm going to go to Nam, I want to go with these guys, because they have more training also. And I grew up in the city as a city slicker. I knew I needed more training than just 8 weeks of basic and 8 weeks of AIT before going into combat.
And I want to come back to, you know what? I'm not going to come back to it. I'm going to go ahead and hit on that right now because I think that's an important, I've heard you say that several times on podcasts. So that's the other thing. I mean, I've listened to you on the Sean Ryan podcast. You and Jocko have had several conversations. Yeah. And then you've had 50 Sogcast episodes where you talk to other gentlemen who were there, or supported you guys when you were there. And you've mentioned that before, where that just wasn't enough time. But wasn't there also, when you first got there, wasn't there some type of orientation or training as well when you got there in country?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for all special forces personnel, when you arrived in country, they had an in-country training course where I forget if I think it was 3 weeks long, 2 or 3 weeks, and there's always interruptions. You know, there might be a day where something happens, the weather's bad, but for us, in our case, it was about 3 weeks. But I included everything from working with helicopters to learning how to direct TAC air on a very general basis, but still learning, and then seeing all the different aircraft that we were scheduled to work with. And this would include some of the experimental helicopters that were surfacing back in 1968. So I landed in the Trang at the end of April 68, and we went right into the training. And then at the end of the training, we volunteered for SOG, and so we had a lot of basic how to administer shots, everything for combat wounds, basic stuff, you know, like for sucking chest wounds, how you would apply a bandage, et cetera, things like that. And so we had that. in addition to what we had in the States with Special Forces training.
Okay. But you were a commo guy.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So you just got some additional training in those, like first aid and whatnot, just because when you're out on patrol, obviously the only guys you had was each other to provide care. So
Yeah, and there weren't enough medics around that every team could have a medic. And of course, the Green Beret medics at that time were the best in the world, and I would argue they're probably still the best trained combat medics anywhere in the world, even today. They're just the men that do it are amazing, and the training is rigorous. I mean, they know how to patch up people and animals, you know.
right. Yeah, I mean everybody's heard about the schools there in San Antonio. So
Yes, sir.
yeah. So that is definitely probably the epitome of a medic school. So and I believe now other services go there as well. Not everybody, but I
Correct.
mean certain people in certain services go there. So
Yes, sir.
yeah. So going back now, favorite gun and favorite caliber, and they don't have to be the same.
Well, I've never been a big gun guy. When it came to Vietnam, what we were issued was a Car 15 for our regular weapon, and it was so efficient. It was collapsible, had the firepower of the M16, and just to have a weapon that you could fire 20 rounds in a second and a half, to this day, still is mind-boggling for me. But in a firefight, it sure helped a lot. And so that by far is my favorite weapon, most reliable, kept it relatively clean. And I had maybe 3 or 4 Car 15s during my time in 2 tours of Vietnam. Never once did it fail. And when I returned to Vietnam, I was even issued a brand new car. It was still wrapped in all the tinfoil and everything. I took it down to the range. It was perfectly zeroed in. And just an amazing weapon. And then my second favorite, of course, would be Thumper. The M79, we cut off the M79 40-millimeter grenade launcher, because that gave us, the recon teams, a lot of extra firepower. So both the Americans always carried sawed-off M79s. And so I'm biased. That's from what I carried.
Yeah, I get it. We've been emailing back and forth for a year because after I heard you on the Sean Ryan podcast, that was where I had a little bit of some epiphany going on where hearing you talk, I started connecting dots as to what we were doing in the mid 80s for Marine Recon. And I'm like, oh, now I'm hearing where our SOPs were based. You know, like I know that it was from lessons learned in Vietnam, but you were really saying some things that resonated with what we were doing in the mid to late 80s. So we started emailing, and the one thing that I had emailed you was when I was at 3rd Recon in Okinawa. It's funny, Recon was at the farthest north base, and I think 1st Battalion, 1st Special Forces Group was at the farthest south base. So we couldn't be more polar opposite, but we did a lot of work together. And we had one Car 15, and it was, you almost had a scrum every time we'd go on missions because everybody wanted that car.
No kidding.
Oh yeah, I mean to this day, that's what I would carry if I were going into somewhere in combat. I would want that car because I did have the opportunity to carry it a few times, and the weight of it, like you said, it is so much more manageable, especially when you're moving through the jungle.
Absolutely.
Is that
And like I said, the initial burst, when you had that initial contact, you just pulled that trigger, you held it for a second and a half, and the enemy had to dodge 20 rounds. You got their undivided attention with it, I'll say that.
Oh, I bet. But that's a that's a second and a half isn't much time. You must already have the next magazine in your hand ready to go.
Yeah, and again, hours of training. So when that happened, I was quick, but I was never as quick as the South Vietnamese on my team, like Sal, Hep, and fucking the guys. Man, they were like whiz kids on that stuff. So it'd be like only a microsecond between dropping the old magazine out and getting the new one in, and getting back to firing either full automatic or semi, depending on what the needs were at that moment in time.
How many magazines did you guys go through on a patrol? And what I mean is, like on average, when you got back to the FOB or CCN, whichever it was at the time, you know, before they consolidated, um,
Yeah,
how many magazines did you have to get from supply to replace ones that were quote unquote lost?
every mission was different, Dave. Because there was at least twice when we got extracted. We were down. I was down personally to my last few rounds of my last magazine, and the last hand grenade was gone, and the last round for the M79. So there's at least twice I distinctly remember getting pulled out and going, "Holy shit, this is too close for comfort." And I carried over 600 rounds for the Car 15.
Right. But on okay, so at the end of that mission, how many magazines? So you had at least 30 magazines when you went out.
30 plus, yes, sir. Like
Right.
33 or 34.
How many,
Sometimes
how many
I even
mags?
carried extra bandolier. So again, I'm not sure, because that was just when you lost them, you go back and grab a box of magazines and get a new box and just go at it.
Okay.
It happened most times. Now we would try to save them, and the way our web gear was set up, if we had the time, just put it down our shirt, because the web gear would hold them in, and then eventually, when things calmed down, pull them out of your shirt and just put it in the rucksack.
Now, when you say inside your shirt, now this again, we also talked last night on the phone,
Yeah.
and I told you that when I read your books or listen to the podcast, I picture it from the perspective of being a team leader as a Marine Recon individual. When you say put it down your shirt, you're not talking inside your t-shirt. Are you talking in between your blouse or your outer shirt and your t-shirt, or actually in your t-shirt?
In between. Yes, sir.
Okay, that's what I was thinking. I have heard.
Yeah, because if you put them in your t-shirt, they would come out all sweaty and smelly.
Yeah,
This way they're just smelly.
right. and sweat leads to rust, so not good.
That too.
You guys were in a very humid environment too. There, did you like we were like when I talked to you? I've been on a patrol in the Philippines and multiple bunch of patrols in Okinawa, which are both humid. They're hot. Um, did you guys have rust issues with your equipment?
None that I recall. I mean, because the weapons, like the Car 15, the M79, we were always cleaning them after every mission. So even during the monsoon season, we shut down for a few weeks. Everything was so clean that it wasn't an issue with us directly. Now, some other weapons, maybe, but for me personally, those were my main weapons. And then if we had carried a pistol, sometimes my assistant team leader would carry the 22 standard, high 22 standard with a silencer. And but they would check them out. They'd be clean. There wouldn't be any rust. Our guys were just really squared away when it came to weapons and keeping them clean.
I believe that. I totally believe that. If you could have dinner with one person from any period in history, it cannot be a relative, so it can't be your wife or anybody like that. Who would it be?
Oh, it had to be George Washington.
Okay.
Just to sit down and talk to him. You figure at some point you get past all the formalities and then just say, this is off the record. What did it really feel like at the Battle of Trenton? Because I grew up in Trenton, New Jersey. and then we're also very much aware of John Honeyman, who was one of his spies. He lived up in a little town north of Princeton, New Jersey, and after the war and everything, when Washington was heading up to New York City, he stopped by John's house and gave him a personal thank you letter, maybe some kind of a commemorative device, I forget, to thank him for his efforts as a spy. Because one of the stories about the Battle of Trenton was that a few weeks before, Washington and a spy got into Trenton and went to one of the local brewers there and encouraged the brewer to have the alcohol that would be served on Christmas Eve and Christmas to be higher alcohol content, so that after Christmas morning, everybody would be more inclined to sleep in a little bit. That would be the day he wanted to attack, and John Honeyman helped to arrange that, apparently. So that's one of those little stories, you know.
A little sabotage going on. I like it.
Indeed.
Maybe that was the originator of Eldest Son. There you go.
Yeah, pre-eldest son for sure.
Right, for sure. And for those who don't know what we're talking about, that was a program where you guys would take in ammunition that had been reworked and would explode when used.
Enemy ammunition. So it was
Yes.
like for AK-47, for their 82 millimeter mortars, and a couple other weapons that they had. And yes, that was one of the PSYOPs operations, and we always carried the doctored AK-47 around, so that sometimes if we came to a cache or if we were on a trail, we just drop it on a trail, because we knew that the North Vietnamese army was always short on ammo. And if they would pick that up and use it, then it would blow up in their face, literally.
Did you guys ever get any reports that that stuff worked, or?
We had several reports that it worked, and years later, some photographs came out of weapons that were used, and stories from some of the NVA survivors, or men who had been on the ground with somebody that fired that ammo and died from using it.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah, so that was made me feel good. And my favorite kind of comedy is dead.
That could lead into a whole other conversation, especially with politics today. But we'll leave that for another time.
Please.
Next time I'm in Tennessee, we'll have to have a sit down drink, and then we can talk all the politics we want.
Indeed.
Okay. Here's the final question I have of the icebreakers.
Yeah.
If you were able to travel back into time to, we'll say, May of 1968, where you're actually at FOB, was it?
Well, we had the in-country training first,
Right.
and then we went to Da Nang for the top secret briefing. We were there for 2 or 3 days. We had a safe house where we stayed in, and that's always a fun story, because, we had security there. It was a secure, safe house, and SF would go there. Sometimes maybe couple spooks would show up, and had food, everything from food, wine, and women, right on through. It was that safe. But and then from there, we got assigned to FOB1 Fubai. Myself, Johnny McIntyre, Tony Harrell, Rick Estes, and a few of us others went up to Fubai. But that was after the top secret briefing.
Okay. So if you could travel back into time to where you finally got to your SOG unit, what one item would you take to John Stryker Meyer of June of 1968? Something from today that you could take to help you on missions back then.
That's a good question, because when it came to equipment and even rations, our S4, the supply people, they had what we needed, and that included an extreme range of weapons, everything from World War II, Korean War, sniper rifles, even gyro jets, experimental weapons. We had experimental M79 multi-shot, like a big shotgun, but it fired 40 millimeter rounds instead of 12 gauge. And but we had pretty much almost everything we needed. In terms of going to the field, the one thing I wish we could have always had was better commo. And I'm not quite sure how that would be achieved. We always had FM for our standard, and then we had the ERC-10 for emergency, and it had a beeper in it, and that way we could talk with the Air Force and the Air Force fact riders who were over us if we couldn't get them on the FM frequencies.
So maybe a satellite phone.
Whoa. Yeah. That would have been the catch me out, I'll tell you that. I would have run over your mother for that.
Well, you know, she's cantankerous old lady, so I don't know that you could harm her. She's a something degree black belt in Taekwondo. She owned her own dojo at one time. So when I say she can be
Wow.
cantankerous, she can be cantankerous.
Yeah, with style.
Yeah. So and it's
wow.
So that's what she did. My dad was in Vietnam. Well, he says 3 times. The first time he was on ship before anybody was on land. So he was off the coast. So he calls that number one. But he was a platoon sergeant for a regimental sniper platoon in Vietnam. He was up at Camp Carroll.
No kidding.
Yeah.
We landed there once or twice. We got pulled out on strings from Laos. And for some reason, we couldn't land at an earlier spot. And those poor Marines, they almost had a heart attack seeing us come in on strings. And coming from the West, they didn't know what was going on. And then we had our South Vietnamese team members.
Oh, yeah.
So they were like, there were some apoplectic moments there when they would see us. And then finally, and of course, we had been in the Swiss seats, so we couldn't walk right away because the circulation would be cut. We'd be laying on the ground trying to crawl to get to the helicopter, you know. But Camp Carroll, yeah, we were there. Not very long, but we were there.
Right. Yeah, it sounds like you guys were in a lot of different places, even on the friendly side, you know?
Indeed. Yeah.
So, yeah, and a Swiss seat. If you've never worn a Swiss seat, it doesn't take long for those things to become uncomfortable. Very, very uncomfortable.
No. So just for your listening on it, the Swiss seat is about 6 or 8 foot piece of rope, and you wrap it around both legs, around your waist, and then you have a D-ring in it, and then a rope would come down from the helicopter with a D-ring at the end of it, and maybe a sandbag to get through the jungle, and then you hooked into that, and that was your ride out of the jungle on a Swiss seat.
Yeah, I was happy that I only used a Swiss seat when we did rappelling. So even rappelling out of the helicopters, it was in a Swiss seat, but I mean, it was temporary, you know. It wasn't,
Yeah.
and I wasn't hanging from it for a half hour. So, goodness gracious, and those things can pinch.
yeah.
Those things can pinch your valuables pretty quickly too. So, the,
I attributed any brain damage to my Swiss seat.
yes, 100%. And I know what you mean by brain damage. So it was. I asked that question because about what you could take back in time, because I was like, would he want to take back maybe MREs where it'd be light, the food would be lighter because you're not you're not carrying cans, or would it be maybe a sight for his the carrying handle on the Car 15? Would it be 30 round magazines? What, you know what I mean? Like, I didn't know. So when you said better commo, I was like, oh, satellite phone, because then being in mountainous terrain doesn't matter. You can still communicate up to a satellite.
Yeah, but can the satellite technology get through 150 feet of jungle to get to the clown on the ground.
That is the real question.
Yeah.
Maybe, maybe not.
Yeah, because that's one thing. Whenever I talk to any today's units, it's like, I hope you gentlemen are still learning how to communicate without satellites and how to navigate without a land navigation system. Because you got to be able to get along without it.
I'll be honest. I think land navigation is a lost art. I've gotten back into orienteering here recently. I actually, I posted a picture on my Instagram page one day saying I can do more with this, and it was my Silva Ranger compass. I said, than you can do with your GPS.
Oh, is that right?
Yep, I sure did. Now, there are some people who are very good with GPS devices who could do a lot with it, but my point is my compass works every day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I don't need to charge it. It works. So,
yeah,
never fails. Now,
Magnetic North never fails you.
No. And here's an interesting tidbit for you because we talked last night and I said I went to Naval Gunfire School in the Philippines. When I was there, one of the first things you had to do, so we did a week in Okinawa. Like the class was broken down into, we did part of it on Okinawa and then we flew to the Philippines and finished it over there. And when we got there, one of the things we had to do was a land nav course. As far as I know, I was the only one who got a 100 on the land nav course. But the reason why is I pulled out my Lensatic, your military Lensatic compass.
Yeah.
Tilt. Oh, and for the audience, if you hear me say tilt, that was his code name in Vietnam. The dial was spinning. It wouldn't stop. It just kept spinning. It was rotating.
Really?
Yeah. So I folded it up. I put it away. I pulled out my Silva Ranger, which I had bought through a magazine in earlier in 86. And that thing was spot on. So I was able to complete the land nav course. And since that day, it has never left my side. I have owned that thing now for 40 years.
Wow.
I just used
That's saying something.
Yeah, I just used it on an orienteering course back in April. It has never failed me. So it's the but I think it's a lost art. I did teach my sons how to navigate with a map and a compass, and we've done some orienteering stuff with it. So yeah, it's definitely a lost art.
Oh, absolutely. And but I'll tell you, and with your recon experience, you would run point on occasions, I assume. Whereas we always had our South Vietnamese that would run point because they were just better in the jungle than we were.
And that's what I was asking you last night. What do you think the reason for that was? You think it was so like as I grew up here in Virginia as a teenager, I spent almost every day in the woods. Like I spent a lot of time in the woods. So I was very comfortable in there, felt good with it. Do you think it was just that they were natives, they were used to being in that environment and that's the advantage they had?
Well, first of all, let's start with their anatomy. They're not as tall nor as heavy as we were. That's the first advantage. I mean, I wore out pants because I wound up crawling so much, going through sometimes where they would just duck down and move on. I'd be down on my knees. And some of my South Vietnamese were city slickers, but once they got on the team and once they started training, we had a few farmers and at least one other guy who, besides being a farmer, had done hunting. So when it came to the jungle, by 1968, like Sal and Hep, my interpreter, and Sal was our counterpart for our Vietnamese team leader. They had been in the jungle for over 2 years, 2.5 years, running SOG missions. So when we were on the ground in enemy territory, I always had them running point because they could see the pit vipers and anything else that would be impeding our way. And they had better hearing. They could hear and smell things in the jungle that I would never pick up.
That's interesting. One of the things I'd also, most guests I don't send any information to, but I sent, because I had started taking notes from day one, reading your book Across the Fence. Um, I sent you everything that I had just so you get an idea of like how I was thinking and what was going through my mind as I was reading your book. But the one thing I didn't hear much about is the pit vipers. Um, what was it? I may have heard you say it on a podcast episode that the 2 foot snake or 2 step snake. I mean, or something. I heard my
Yeah,
dad
yeah.
say it before too.
Right. There's a few different snakes that were very venomous, that were strong. They had the pit viper, which, of course, we heard and all through orientation and stuff. And then, but there was the 2-stepper, and I forget what its name was. But once it bit you, you took 2 steps and you're dead. That's just how strong the poison was, and hence the name. So, with our South Vietnamese running point, whenever we had an issue with a snake or anything else, I was told there were centipedes. Now, again, sometimes I wouldn't see them because by the time I would get in our formation as we moved, there'd be a point man and somebody behind the point man before, then I'd be number 3 in line. And just the way things worked out there, I remember seeing pit vipers, they pointed out, hanging in the branches that we stayed away from. And there was just this little moment, it's like, thank God for my South Vietnamese, because I may not have seen it.
Yeah.
Still a city slicker. I'm a city slicker that grew up in Trenton, New Jersey. I didn't spend a lot of time in the woods.
Right. But I mean, but at the same time, though, obviously Trenton has changed dramatically since you were a kid to now.
Yes, not necessarily for the positive,
Right.
sadly.
But I mean, too, the population, the Trenton probably doesn't look the same, you know?
Oh, that's true. Absolutely.
At least when you were a kid, there was probably more vegetation, more trees, more all of that. Now everything's becoming more urban on the East Coast.
Yeah, I haven't been in Trenton since 2004, so I couldn't tell you.
Yeah, I would. I don't bet on anything, and I'd be willing to wager that there's less vegetation there now than there was 22 years ago.
Oh yeah.
So, as much as I've heard you guys talk about how good the South Vietnamese are too, I was kind of surprised. I heard that there were a few times that they went out on their own, but I'm surprised they didn't have more just straight South Vietnamese patrols that worked with the South Vietnamese pilots too.
Well, okay, there's different differences here. In terms of SOG, it was an SF mission where we worked with our counterparts. And that was the beauty of it, was having them with their expertise, and we would have, like with Sal and Hep, men who had been in this war for over 2 years by the time we get there in 68. So it's their experience. We had to earn their respect also. And whereas the South Vietnamese helicopter pilots, the code name King Beast, and in 68 they were flying the old H-34s, which had B-17 9-cylinder rotary engines in them. But those King Beasts could take more hits than the Huey could. So we liked them. The South Vietnamese pilots, the majority were just absolutely fearless. I think they had to design special seats in the King Bees for the South Vietnamese pilots just to hold their balls, because they were just so fearless. And So they were in the league by themselves, and so they always flew. There were some issues because of language, but in terms of my experiences with them, they always came. And we had one mission where we'd been engaged for 4 hours, and we were down to our last magazine, and King be hovered for 10 minutes, took 48 hits, but he pulled us out. And with the teams, because it was an SF mission, the Green Berets were the ones that did all the intel. But for a mission prep, we would go over it with our team leader, and then the men who would go on that mission talk specifically about it with them for planning purposes. And sometimes we had a spell when the majority of the 30 recon teams at FOB1 were out of operation. And Idaho, for a couple of days, was the only team in camp. So first thing in the morning, we get briefed, go to a target, get shot out a primary, secondary, alternate, come back for lunch, and do it again in the afternoon. And it gets shot out again. And during those times, when things were thin like that, we would just get the target folder, say we want to get a team on the ground, and whatever the mission was, I'd brief the men who were going to go. This is what the mission is. If we had to do any equipment changes, if there were telephone lines that were evident, then we would take a wiretapping device, which would be a cassette recorder, and take that and then have the attachments that we could tap in for the wiretaps. And then we would always turn the tapes over to the CIA once we got back.
Now, as
So
someone
there'd be that.
as someone who's used tape recorders back in the day, so
Yeah.
I know what you're talking about. Those are not waterproof. So how did you guys prevent them from being damaged from water?
Plastic bags, keep them wrapped. They did have plastic back then.
Are you sure?
Yeah. Ziploc bags have not been invented yet, I don't think. But they definitely have plastic. And for sure, we would keep them wrapped, or at least have them in the backpack so they'd be in the part where it would not get moisture.
Okay, speaking of backpacks, what were you guys using, like the standard military Alice pack?
No, not at all. We had the Special Forces for SOG had their own supply channel that came out of Okinawa, the Counterinsurgency Supply Office, and they were based out of Okinawa. And so all of our, most, if not all of our supplies came through CISO. And they developed an indigenous rucksack. So it was a little bit smaller. It did not have the frame of an Alice pack. And it had 3 pouches on the side and a little bit smaller container for carrying things. So that's what we used all the time. And that was the same rucksack that all of our South Vietnamese would wear also.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, because once you put a PRC-25 radio in it, that took up a lot of capacity. And then I'd always have a sweater wrapped around the bottom of it so it wouldn't be too harsh on your back. And then we had, speaking of rations, we had LRPs at that time, long-range patrol rations. And they were dehydrated. And, of course, we would just put water in there. They came in plastic pouches, and they were very light. And then we'd put water in, mix it, and then fold it back up and put it under your T-shirt right next to your body. And then a couple hours later, eat it, because your body heat would warm it up, at least the body temperature.
I did the same thing, but I put it in my cargo pocket of by my thigh to help warm it up. Same concept.
Oh, yeah.
See,
Yes, sir.
See, 15, 20 years later, we're still doing the same thing, just different location. Still using the same radios. That's the other thing. Till I was using, when I left Marine Recon in 91, we were still using the Prick 104 and the Prick 77.
Really?
Yes. And
And just for your audience, the PRC 77 was basically identical to the PRC 25, which was FM, and and that was the primary means of camo. You know, and Jocko said the same thing when I was interviewed by Jocko Willink when he was in the SEALs. His first radios were those PRC 77s.
yeah, I went to, so in 92, in the fall of 92, I was assigned to the Scout Sniper Instructor School, and we got a school slot for long range surveillance leaders course put on by, I think it's the 3rd Ranger Bat down at Benning. So they were like, "Hey Dave, do you want to go?" And I'm like, "I'm in." So we did a mobile training team down to Benning, and I think we got the slot because we were traveling as the whole school went down to Benning and gave the 3rd Ranger Bat a mobile training team training session, and then at the end I stayed and went through long range surveillance leaders course, and they had radios in there and other stuff that I was like, I don't even know what this looks alien to me. I have no idea what you're using. I told those guys who were in the army what we were using. They're like, I've never seen one of those. What are you talking about? So it's wild how mainstream army was way ahead of me in recon as a scout sniper in the Marines. Like it was all foreign to me. I had to learn a whole new radio because I had no idea what it was.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
And it would have been probably about that same time because it sounds like Jocko went in the early to mid 90s, I guess. Somewhere in
Yeah.
there. So he was behind the times with us in the Marines. So the whole Department of Navy was behind.
That's what he said. Yes, sir.
That's crazy. This is where. So did the equipment go through First Battalion, First Special Forces group on Oka, or was it a totally different
No.
command that was doing your supply?
Yeah, completely separate command. It was set up for the secret war and to support the A camps. And the guy who ran it was a guy named Ben Baker, and he was the OSC on it. And he was just an amazing man. Like today, people talk about the Seiko watches, and they wanted to issue watches that had a luminous dial. And so initially, back in the early 60s, a lot of the Green Berets would always have a Rolex and a sapphire ring. Well, by 68, we got the food buy. We were issued a Seiko, and it was self-winding, had a luminous dial, and it had the day and the date, which I'd never seen before. So I always thought that was cooler than a Rolex, as well as the fact that it was self-winding. And at night, I always wore it with the face down, but I had to wear gloves at night because the luminous dial was that bright. You could see it from a distance.
The darkest night I have ever seen that I've ever been involved in, and I'm sure this is going to translate to exactly your experience, was in Okinawa where you had multiple canopy, and literally my eyeballs must have been the size of saucers because I was forcing them open as wide as I could go, and I literally could not see my hand extended out. We were having to patrol with our hand on the pack in front of us because you could not see it.
Wow.
But
What did the point man use for aiding his vision?
nothing. We didn't have anything. So that dude was stumbling around in the
Wow.
dark. Yeah, that's why. That's why when in my notes you saw about moving. So you guys called it the RON, remain overnight. In the Marines, we called
Right.
it harbor site, where we would harbor up.
Sure.
So same thing, different term, but that's why I was in my notes. I was asking you about moving your RON at night. I'm like, how in the world did you guys move at night at all? Because I know what it's like. Like we didn't move for long, like maybe 5 minutes and we were done because nobody could see anything. At one time, my hand came off the pack in front of me, and that's probably the closest in my life I've come to panicking. You know what I mean? Like,
Oh, sure.
because I couldn't
Yeah.
see anything, and I knew to my right, not far from my right, there's like basic. It wasn't a cliff, but it might as well have been a cliff, because
Yeah.
with the pack on and the load we were carrying, had I stumbled to the right and gone down that hill, it would have been terminal speed all the way to the bottom, hundreds of feet. Who know, who knows? But it would have been horrible. So my point to this was, that's where people don't understand. If you have a luminous watch face, it's like turning on a flashlight in the middle of a jungle.
Right.
Yeah, it's unlike anything you've ever experienced.
Yeah, I was always surprised, but we never missed a combo check at midnight or 2 o'clock in the morning because they had an airborne command and control aircraft that always flew over Southeast Asia 24/7. And during the day, it was codenamed Hillsborough. Then at night, it was Moonbeam. And if worse came to worse, we couldn't get any other combo, but we could always try to check in with them when they flew over.
I assume they were. Was that with the Prick 25? Because that would be VHF, wouldn't it? Like line of sight.
We made contact with the FM
Okay.
because at night we'd have the long antenna up, for
Oh.
improved combo.
Okay. So that was with the 77 then, or the 25?
Well, we only carried the 25. It wasn't
Okay.
until near the end of my second tour of duty that they forced us to carry the 77 and the KY-38 scrambling component, which was just a pain in the ass that seldom worked.
Well,
But that's another story for another day.
Well, I thank you for struggling with that, because by the time I came in, the KY-38 was much smaller. They had made it much smaller and much better. So thank you for your struggles.
Indeed. Yeah, we complained to the high heavens on that one.
Yeah, well, 20 years later, they got it right.
Good.
But we would carry, there were a lot of times till we carried a 77 and a 104.
What's a 104?
So, well, shoot, this is where I wish I could share the picture with you. It's so the 77 or your 25 was the HF high frequency, and or I'm sorry, VHF. The Prick 104.
No, it's FM. FM.
Oh, well, the Prick 25 was?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so the Prick 77, which was about the same size as the 25, was
right.
VHF. Our 104s must have been what replaced the 25, so they're not as thick, but they're wider. And
oh, wow.
Yeah, so they were thinner but wider, and they used a different battery, but they were HF, so you're FM, and we could or actually AM, and we could transmit long distances with it.
Wow.
Yeah, so I enjoyed it. I actually, one time we were doing some training up in New York, off of Long Island, before we deployed to the Mediterranean, and I was struggling to get comm with anybody. And I normally always had good comm. So I was like, I'm thinking, and I'm not a comm guy, but I understand it. I understand radio wave propagation and all that. So we went to a backstop at night. We went to a backstop at a baseball field, and I wired the radio to the backstop to use as an antenna, and it worked. Unfortunately, oh shoot, I'm trying to think of the big airport right there in New York. All of a sudden, I had air traffic control on my radio. I could not
JFK?
Yeah, it was JFK. I could not disconnect my radio fast enough. I was like, I do not want to be on this right now. But yeah. So man, when I read your book, it brings back so many memories, because the struggles with the radios, and sometimes we nicknamed them land anchors. Because if
That's a good term. I like it.
yeah, if they didn't work, that's literally what it was. It was a land anchor.
Oh yeah.
I want to go to the part where we talked a little bit last night, and I said I wanted to ask you about it. The heaviest pack we ever were told we had to carry was 110 pounds, and it was ludicrous. So they literally packed it, took it to the CO, put it on a scale, and were like, this thing's 110 pounds. This is ridiculous. We were going to Korea. And he's like, yeah, you're right. All right, you guys scale it down to what you need. But you said you put a pack on a scale one time and it was 90 pounds. That's a lot of weight to
Well,
carry.
it was a combination of the rucksack and the web gear, which the web gear had the pouches with all the magazines and hand grenades and
Okay.
things like that.
Did you guys do like what we did? You kept everything of critical importance on your web gear so that if you had to jettison your pack in order to get away, you still had everything you needed to survive, and whether it was a firefight or just escape and evasion.
Right. Yeah, we have it, and then but at that point, our primary combo would have been the ERC-10, which was a handheld, uh, either VHF or UHF, high frequencies, that it had an alert channel on it that once we went up on it, any of the aircraft in the area, if they heard it, they would come back and we'd have combo with them.
Okay, so that was your ground to air communication.
Emergency, yes.
Yeah. Okay. We had one like that we didn't get very often. We carried it a few times, and I can remember getting a brief from I think he was a gunny, the commo guy, and he was like, "Whatever you do not get rid of these radios. There's $400 worth of gold in this antenna."
Oh, really?
Yeah, they had inside. You couldn't see it from the outside, but he was. It was like the old tape antennas that could bend.
Right, right.
And he said, I guess because it transmits well, that they literally had gold, and this is back in the '80s. So I wonder how much
Wow.
that would be worth now. That in just the
Yeah,
antenna. All right,
that's amazing.
how you had made a comment on one of the. I don't think it was in the book. Now I've read all of your books, and I've read Lynn Black's Whiskey Tango Foxtrot. I'm in the process of reading another one right now, and I've listened to an untold number of podcast episodes. But you had mentioned at one point that not all teams went on the same number of missions. Is that just because not all teams are created equal, so the better teams got more work?
It was be a balance of things. I mean, there was legitimate cases of teams that where you have people rotating out with their DROs, and then teams that would be recovering from combat where one or two team members had been wounded or killed in action, and then you had new teams that were reforming, had to do training before they would go to the field. And like I said, November of '68 at FOB1 alone, there had been 30 teams on the roster, and we were down to my team just being the last one that was up and running between all the other factors. And then, sometimes you have teams that would train a lot, but somehow when it came time to get issued a mission, they would get skipped over or they would have an excuse not to run because they're still training or something like that. But that's just a rare exception. The majority of the teams and the guys who were there, they had a mission and they wanted to go. When it was their turn, they would gear up, and we had a lot of remarkable teams. And at FOB1, we were much closer to the teams and other teams because it was a smaller compound than what we had at CCN. And, it was just a really, And the war was tough. 68 was the highest casualties during the Vietnam War with the regular conventional troops as well as with SOG. And so it took a toll.
I get that. Yeah. I mean, you guys had 100% casualty rate, so I totally get that.
So during some of the months, yes, sir.
Tilt, do you mind if we take a quick restroom break?
No, go ahead.
Okay. Oh, I tell you, caffeine is definitely a drug, and I'm addicted, and I love it. I've
I'm
been
with you.
drinking coffee steadily. I've got the Jocko Energy Fuel going on, so whew, it helps make the hard drive spin a little faster. I need all
Oh
the help
yeah,
I can get.
I hear you.
When you guys got a mission, like how much advance notice did you have to prep and prepare and plan for that mission before you actually went across the fence?
There's wide variations. For example, where we just talked about the camp being low on teams that were operational. So in the morning we get a target, get shot out, come back afternoon. Here's your target. Talk to the team, make any equipment adjustments that were necessary, and then from there, the opposite end, we had one of our missions was to insert Air Force sensors that were placed alongside of a main trail that was part of the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And the Ho Chi Minh Trail was from Hanoi up north in North Vietnam, where the enemy was, and it came south through North Vietnam, and then it would go across the border into Laos, and then there'd be a series of trails that would come down with a branch going into Vietnam was broken into 4 corps. I Corps was north, right on the border by DMZ, 2 Corps, 3 Corps, which was where Saigon was, about 400 miles south, and then 4 Corps was south of Saigon, and it was a huge corps, a lot of waterways and all this. I never was down there, so I don't know. I have no expertise in that. So for this type of a mission, we had a primary sensor that had coaxial cables going out from one side and the other that led to other smaller sensors with antennas on them, and we had to put them in, insert them, and the only thing that would be shown would be the antenna on top. And so we trained up for that, getting on the ground, setting up security, putting in the first main sensor, then attaching the coaxial cables, running them out to the 2 sensors at each end of the central device. And we did 2 of them. We did one in the Ashaw Valley in August of 68. Then we had monsoons that were going on at the time. And then we did one up in Quezon, up on Highway 9. And this is after the Marine Corps closed down its base at Quezon, the historic base, where they had a 77-day battle with the NVA following the Tet Offensive in 68. And again, we trained for that. And we had a couple other missions where we would literally train for 3 or 4 days on techniques. We were going to, by 69, the NVA down the Ho Chi Minh Trail began to put in checkpoints. So the people coming south would go past the checkpoint. And we had planned a mission, and we found a checkpoint that was near the DMZ, and that we could hit it, go in and just kidnap the people and bring them back, because the best intel source is a live enemy soldier. So we practiced for that using CS gas and using helicopters and all kinds of different techniques, technical issues. And that was like a 3 or 4 day training session. And even there, like during one of those training sessions, we were using hand grenades, and one of my South Vietnamese guys did not throw the hand grenade far enough, and I got hit with shrapnel. from it. Shrapnel that I still carry with me today. In fact, it ruined my last MRI that they tried to take in that area, which was right around my brain cells there. But and then, other missions, it would be the wiretapping. We spent a lot of time with wiretapping. Again, just making sure that everything was set up, how it tied into a line. And Sal and Hep and a couple of other team members were really good at climbing the telephone poles, because the NVA in some parts of Laos had poles up already. So they would climb up the pole, attach it, and then they would take some mud with them, so that when they would come down, they would cover the wire with mud or something that would blend in with the environment around it, so that enemy troops coming by, they wouldn't spot the wire just hanging off the pole. And trained long and hard on that. And then, of course, we had ambushes that ambushes that would be set up with claymore mines. And claymores were the explosives, anti-personnel mines that have like 400 or 500 ball bearings in it. And when they were detonated, anything within 160 feet would be killed with the ball bearings. So you have a couple of claymores in the set up, and the center would be a block of C4 cut down to a specific length to knock out an enemy soldier, knock them unconscious from the explosion. And then the claymores were set up to the right and to the left of that to kill anything around that one person. Then you capture the person and take him back for interrogation purposes. And we worked those often. And of course, down the range, just day to day, a lot of weapons training, so that when a firefight came up, you weren't thinking about what you had to do. You're automatically firing, changing the magazines, and sticking with where your next line of fire was going to be. So that's the variations on the training.
When you say training live fire, like what types of things were you guys doing to prepare for, at the range before you went out on missions to prepare for the missions?
Well, one of the primary concerns was if you ever got ambushed. And even in triple canopy, there were times when people would be concerned about it, or in the jungle, maybe you'd come up to single or double canopy, where there's more visibility. And like when we ran in Cambodia, the part of Cambodia they were in, it was less than single canopy. You could see 200 to 300 yards away, maybe 400 yards, depending. And so you spread your column out. And so we just drilled the immediate contingency. Like you're on patrol, and then you get hit. And how do you react? From the front, from the right side, left side, back side, and just did it over and over again with the collapsing, going backwards, and then reacting off of it from the right or the left. And we just did those so many times. But fortunately, our team never got ambushed. But the fact was, you still were working with your weapon, still working with your other team members, and just moving and having the SOP. So you'd have strong reaction that you didn't have to think about. It was automatic.
Now, we called those immediate action drills. Is that what did you guys call them?
Yeah.
Same?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Did you guys primarily just patrol in a single file then?
Yes, sir. Yeah. A couple of times I violated that. We had one mission where we got into an LZ, and a lot of the area had been a prior fields. Like they had basically farmed, the Laoses would farm side of a mountain. They'd have slash and burn areas where they'd burn out after several crops, they would come back and just burn the soil or the topsoil and whatever vegetation was there. So we got on the ground, and it was an area that used to be old fields. Well, I got the team, and we just went up that mountain. We didn't. Normally, we would move like 10, go for 10 minutes, stop for 10 minutes to listen to the jungle, to hear what it sounded like. But otherwise, we would just go on that mission. And we just went up there and kept going without stopping for maybe an hour, a little over an hour. And another time, we got inserted in a valley. The Air Force put us in the valley on a mission where we were supposed to be inserted on top of a mountain. And we came out. It was a small valley, so I split the team on one side, and we were literally walking through this valley with one team on one half on one side of the valley, and the other part of the team was on the other side. And we just went through this valley post haste and looking for trouble, because when we got inserted, they had flown over some farmers that were working the fields that were a short distance away. We went the opposite direction, and we just violated all the rules. We split the team. We didn't take any immediate breaks for maybe an hour or two, because we had to get as far away from there as possible, because we knew that they had dogs and things like that. And so we stayed like that for a couple of hours. We finally got to the end of that valley where it narrowed to a road, and then we went across the road up to the hillside, and then we looked for an area to set up the RON for the night. And they came out as hard, but they didn't find us because we had gone so far.
It's interesting you said that, and I've heard you say that before, where you would stop for 10 minutes after insert, or 10 minutes after insertion, you would stop and listen and get acclimated to everything, which is what we were taught as well. But there were times that I felt, if you felt confident that you were inserted covertly, then you could take the time and go through all the SOPs properly. But like you're saying, if you're not confident that you got inserted without the enemy knowing, then sometimes the safest and best bet is just get away from, because that's where they're coming. They're coming to that point where the helicopters drop you off. You need to get away from that spot as far and as quickly as possible.
Oh, yeah. And again, once you get on the ground, you want to hear what the jungle sounds like. If the jungle comes back to its normal sounds of a jungle during the day, then it was safe to move on. That way you could give Covey's the code name for our FAC, give them a team okay, and then we'd move out. Again, you move for 10 minutes, pause for 10 to hear what was going on in the jungle.
And it was interesting when, well, I forget who it was you were talking to, and you guys were saying the worst sound was silence.
Yeah, because you took that break and the jungle sound didn't get back to a normal daily sounds of a jungle between the birds, animals, and whatever else would be going on, even the insects. And if it's quiet, you knew there was somebody else not far away. And get ready for trouble.
Does that? I assume that increases the pucker factor at that point.
It definitely tightens up to -0. That's for sure.
Yeah, and there was one thing in particular I wanted to ask you about, that I thought was crazy. So, in your book, I'm not going to open the book because I have it written down, so I can just read part of it. But on page 149 of Across the Fence, you said, and then I heard Sal hiss like a snake. I turned with a start and saw Sal crouched, his Car 15 tucked under his arm, ready to fire. He pointed across to the hill we had just descended, to the narrow grassy area, a short distance from where we had emerged from the jungle. We stood looking across the ravine at 2 NVA soldiers armed with AK-47 rifles and smiles. What in the world is going through your mind at that moment?
It was like WTF times 2.
Okay.
because I indicated to Sal I wanted to get. I think I wanted to pull my M79 and just put a round at those two guys because they were within range. And he said no. You know, they were smiling at us where they could have been shooting at us, and that meant there were some problems lying ahead right away. So we continued up the mountain. We told Don Wolkin was the 1-0 on that mission, and that was Target Echo 4. And it was 2 days after the historic mission with Lynn Black, where his 9-man team came up against 10,000 NVA, and 6 of the 9 lived to talk about it. And so we assumed that they had some plans for us. So we went up. Don took us straight up a hill, and we got on top of a little knoll. And that little knoll is what saved us, because they hit us around 2 o'clock. And but the knoll was small enough that they could only send so many people at once. And they were coming at us from a couple of directions out of the jungle. And it was just so weird because in the beginning, we didn't see any bodies. It would just be the AKs, men firing, and then we were firing into the jungle. It kept blowing them back down the hill. And then after a couple hours, Don pointed out to me something that Hep had showed him, which was they began stacking up the dead bodies. And again, we were in, maybe there was double canopy, but still pretty dark. And at first you couldn't see exactly what they were doing, but they were, as we killed them, they were beginning to stack up the bodies so they could climb on top and try to shoot down and get an angle to shoot down at us. And that was an indication that those troops were deadly serious about the war and about getting to us.
That's crazy. So it almost seems,
Absolutely.
yeah, I could see where Sal would say no. Do you think, because you guys have talked about, them using sticks and them using whistles and them using a single shot to try to force you guys into certain areas so they could ambush you. Do you think those two guys just standing there with smiles on their face were ways to drive you a certain direction?
That's a good question. They're also big. They may have been Chinese.
Oh.
I talked about that with Hep many years later, because at first they just appeared to be large Vietnamese, but then we heard that there were some Chinese out there, and just not sure. But we never had a chance to find out. We just knew that within an hour from us visually seeing them and getting up to the top of that knoll, that they hit us, and they hit us pretty hard. They kept coming. And we didn't have any commo for at least 2 hours plus before we finally made commo and then had some TAC air to come in to support us.
And if I remember correctly, you guys ended up getting extracted after getting commo. I don't think you guys had to stay out there that night. I believe you came in that.
Correct. The firefighting went on for 2 more hours, but then we brought in TAC air. We had A-1 Sky Raiders with napalm, bombing runs. We had some fast movers that came in with guns or bombs. And then we had helicopter gunships from the 176th Assault Company, the muskets. And they were out of the Marical Division. And they were absolutely fearless. And then we had Scarface from the Marine Corps. There's old gunships. And so we had a lot of coverage once we made contact with the Air Force. And then they kept coming at us. And then near the end, the Covey Rider, Spider Parks, found a small spot where a helicopter could hover. It couldn't land. And South Vietnamese Air Force pilot, Captain Tin, came in with the old King Bee, the CH-34, hovered for 10 minutes while we were getting through elephant grass to get to them. To get to him and the helicopter. And we finally lifted out. Again, that was my first time where we went through all my ordnance, all the hand grenades, and the M79 rounds. They were all used up in that firefight. and he pulled out. A couple days later, he came back to FOB1 for another insertion. He had a different King bee this time, and he said that the King bee that he hovered with took 48 bullet holes that day, and we got picked up the last light. And again, none of our people were hit. It's just amazing to have that many bullet hits and nobody on the crew or our people of the 6-man team were hurt.
Did you guys ever find out? And it may have been in the book. I don't remember how big that enemy force was that was bearing down on you.
No.
Okay.
No.
Because you had mentioned, right? You mentioned Lynn and his historic event, which was just a couple days earlier, and I know they ended up having like 10,000 enemy soldiers coming after them that day. But was your mission also? I mean, was his also an Echo 4? I don't remember the target area.
No, his target was, I believe, was an Ashall target.
Oh, okay.
And like the lower southwest side of the Ashall in Laos. And but that's my memory on it. And the reason why we know it's 10,000, about 25 years after that mission, our government went back to try to find a team leader who was killed and left behind. And Lynn had worked with them on the mapping and suggestions for where to go to look for the body. Well, they never found him. But at the end of that effort, he got a phone call from a guy from North Vietnamese Army who was a general, high-ranking general, and he told Lynn that he was a colonel, and he led the ambush of the team that day. And Lynn's team got ambushed by 50 NVA after they had landed within a few hours, because the team leader made a mistake. He was a new team leader, and he was not inclined to listen to people. So he walked the team into an L-shaped ambush, and he was killed instantly, and the point man was killed instantly, tragically. And then they had a firefight literally all day. And he got out near the end of the day, last light. A Jolly Green Giant came in and hovered for quite a long period of time before Lynn and the remainder of the team got to it and got lifted out. But we never had any comparison notes. If there were, I don't recall them today. Certainly nobody talked to me about it.
I mean, for them to stack bodies to try to get better elevation and view to be able to shoot down at you guys, and then for you to be completely out of, or darn near out of 600 plus rounds of ammunition, all of your grenades, I'm sure your claymores were probably detonated, everything. That's a lot of people on the receiving end of that ammo. And you've talked about how there were times where you never saw the enemy. Did you ever see the enemy at that point, or were you just shooting at noise and movement and muzzle blast?
Yes, that was it. Just that, the noise and the muzzle blast. And because even getting to the helicopter, we were in elephant grass. And elephant grass could be anywhere from 6 to 12 feet. And it's thick stuff, and just getting through it. It was only maybe 10, 12 yards, but took us almost 10 minutes to get through it because it was so thick.
How bad?
And maintaining the fire,
Yeah. How bad did the elephant grass tear you up?
Not bad enough that I remembered it. We were just glad to get through it,
Right. Yeah, I get that.
Yeah, because at one point, I fell down, then Don literally ran over me, and then the team ran over me. Don fell down, and I literally ran over him.
So you guys were just laying down for each other, and everybody run past.
Yeah, I wish I could tell you it was planned that way, but it wasn't. And in the meanwhile, they're doing shooting. The guys who were still standing would be, if the enemy got close enough, they were taking ties, like Fulk or Hap. Or the other gentleman on the team was for that mission was Jim Davison, and he would be firing. And then, of course, we had gun runs, and that was when I got we were en route to the King Bee that was hovering. The muskets made a couple really close gun runs. As the first time I had shell casings from a helicopter land in the back of my shirt on my neck and burn the skin
That means it
from
was
those
like,
shell casings.
that was literally like right over top of you then.
Literally. Yeah, they were that close.
Wow.
And that's what saved us. If they hadn't done that, I don't know if we would have been able to get the King Bee out or not.
I've got to ask you, and I don't
Yeah.
recall anybody ever asking you this question. After those, because you said that was the first mission where you basically ran out of ammo and everything you had. Did you ever get back to the FOB and go and question your ability to survive one of those ever again?
No,
Okay.
I didn't think about it that way because we got back and A, we were glad to be alive. B, we knew what Lynn had been through 2 days earlier, and other teams. You know, John Walton's team back in August had gotten overrun 2 or 3 times, and then they broke the attack with a A1 Skyraider gun run that hit one of the Americans, Tom Cunningham, and it took his leg off. But John was able to save Tom and get him back. So we knew that we're up against an enemy that was tenacious, and that this is the war we were engaged in. We had to do the best we could, and never quite thought about it that way, to be honest.
Well, it's probably for the better.
Oh yeah, I mean, uh, you know, John Walton and I became good friends during that time. And later that night, we were at the club. They had a show that was going on, but John and I were talking. He goes, "Did you kill anybody today?" And I said, "You know, today is the first day I could tell that we killed somebody. We had some people that kept coming up the mountain from our right-hand side. And I was on the radio with Spider, and I kept seeing this little motion, but I couldn't tell what it was, but it was NVA climbing up, crawling up the mountain. And I had my Car 15 pointed. When he stuck his head up, I just fired one round, hit him in the head. And but I still had the radio open. So when I fired, poor Spider blew his ears out.
Right.
When I got back, he chewed my ass out for not letting go of the hand. You know,
The
the
handset.
device. You squeeze the handset. You squeeze the handset, and then you let go. Then that way it's not transmitting. But when it's squeezed, it transmits.
Right. Yeah. That's
revealed, you know.
better to have someone mad at you than, you not know that they're mad at you because you didn't make it back.
Indeed. And that was the first time I was talking to John, and I knew, and then Spider and I talked about it later. I explained the same thing to him. He goes, "Well, you had to do it, and if you didn't kill him, you know he would have killed you right away." That's what it came down to.
Would
Kill
you
or be killed.
would you say then on most of the missions you never even saw the people that people died obviously, but you guys didn't even really see the enemy that you were killing?
A lot of times, because the triple canopy is dark, and when we made contact, it was because our South Vietnamese could hear them or smell them or something, and we would always open fire first on them when they were getting ready to close in on us. And oh yeah, and it was just weird. And the jungle was so thick that when they're opening fire, they might only be 15, 20 feet away, but you knew where they were, and we fired back. And then of course we used hand grenades, and then sometimes we would be in vegetation where we could fire off our M79 rounds to get their attention,
Right. Oh, I forgot to ask something earlier when you were talking about the wiretaps and we were talking about training and you guys are using cassette recorders for that. I assume that someone had to retrieve the cassette recorder because it's not transmitting that data, or am I wrong?
Yeah, it's just an old-fashioned tape recorder. You turn it on to record,
Right. Push
and
record.
then
Yeah.
I think we had 60-minute tapes in it, so you had 30 minutes on each side. So we would monitor it that way, and they could monitor if there was sound or not. And the CIA told us that even if there was no sound on the telephone line that we could hear, they told us to record it anytime we had a chance, and then they would amplify it 100 times. And because the NDA phones, when they put the phone in the cradle, it would not shut off the phone like American phones. Those phones were still alive and active, and so we would tape it, turn the tapes over, and then, like I said, the CIA would then amplify it. And they said they got intel off of those. Again, they wouldn't come back and say, "Hey, thanks, you guys did a great job. We learned this and this." No, we never got that from the CIA.
So was someone having to climb back up the pole an hour later to change out the cassette?
Yeah, well, Sal or Fook would climb up the pole and do the tap, and then come down and cover up the wire. And then we would monitor the tape. And when it ran out, then flip the tape over right there. And then when it was time to leave, the way they set it up, the wiretap, we would just pull the wire and it'd come right down. Then they would fold it up and go.
Okay, now I'm tracking how you're doing it. So you guys would move away a little bit, but the recorder would still be wired to the tap on the telephone pole.
Correct.
Okay.
So the recording would go into a cassette.
Right. Okay. That's the part where I was like, how are they doing this? You know, and again, in my mind, I'm trying to visualize what in the world. Okay, so how long was that wire that connected the cassette recorder to the actual wiretap? So how far could you get away from? I assume these poles are next to the Ho Chi Minh Trail, so you don't want to be, even though it's dark and it's jungle and there's a lot of canopy, you still want to be as far away as you can. So how far were you able to move away from the wiretap?
Well, for the one that was the most successful one that we had running for probably over an hour, we were just right next to the pole, because the pole was about maybe, I don't know, a short distance off the road. It was like up from the road, there was like a little hill, and that's where the telephone pole was. So we crossed the trail, and then we set up the wiretap, and we weren't that far away. And I forget how long the wire would be from the tap and the telephone line down to the recorder. I just forget.
How much of a pucker?
Long enough to get the job done.
Right. What was the pucker factor like anytime you had to cross the Ho Chi Minh Trail?
Oh, I was right there at -0, because again, we come to the trails. If it came to a smaller trail that would just be like a small path, then we would come and then not step in the path. But like on this trail, where it was big enough for a tank to drive down, we would set up security on where we're going to cross, and have one man to the right, one man to the left. Each man would go across one at a time, and then the last two would be the security. They would come across, following the footsteps of the predecessors, and then on the other side, we set up security to the right and to the left of where we're entering back into the jungle. And then the last man would come and cover up any footprints.
Now, would he try to cover up the footprints on the road too?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay. I didn't know if.
Yeah, because they had guys that were walking up and down the trail. They didn't know we were in. It was probably one of the best inserts we ever had. We just violated all of our rules. We covered a lot of distance, and where we were on that trail, they didn't know we were there. Now, later on in the day, they knew, but for the initial success, that's what led us to the wiretap.
This is going to jump into a whole other section here, but why? So for the listener, because you and I have spoken about this, and I've heard you talk about it, and you and I spoke specifically about how you guys were compromised in Saigon. What do you think the reason is you were able to get in undetected in this case? And it wasn't until later in the mission that they finally caught up with you.
Well, this was during that period of time when other teams were down. And in the morning, we had gone out and gotten shot out of a couple LZs, went back, had lunch. They gave us the new target. And Spider Parks, who was he was the first recon team leader for ST Idaho. And when I joined the team, and our team had been wiped out, and Spider had to rebuild it with Hep and Sal. And so Don Wolken was the assistant team leader, and I was the radio operator in the beginning back in May of '68. And so for this target, we knew it was Echo 8, and we knew they had telephone lines in there. And so we took the tape recording with us, and Covey, Spider Parks, picked the LZ for us. And they didn't tell Saigon where we were going to insert, because it was just so quick. You know, we had lunch, we got briefed, Spider flew out, found the LZ, we got inserted. And then, of course, after we'd been on the ground, we were going to get a POW. And because they just didn't know we were there. And we had a whole ambush set up, the Claymore ambush with everything. And the Spider came back for a call check of 2 or 3 hours later. I gave him the code that said, we'll have a POW, we'll be back at the primary LZ. And he said, don't move, do nothing. I'm at 10,000 feet and I can't see the mountain you're on, let alone find an LZ. And then he ordered us to get to high ground and to stay on high ground until the weather broke. And of course, that didn't happen for 4 or 5 days.
Now, when you say he ordered you, is that just him understanding the broader, the breadth of the mission, and having been a team leader, saying, basically telling you guys to do what he said to do because he knew that was the safest way to proceed?
Yeah, because if we made enemy contact, we needed TAC air. TAC air couldn't find the mountain we were on, let alone direct, accurate, close air support.
That was also the same time you guys then heard tanks, didn't you?
Oh, yeah. Like shortly after that transmission from Spider, we pulled down the wiretap, we pulled back the ambush, all the claymores, and all that just changed everything right away. I'll tell you that for sure.
You're changing the camera angle, and it's like right on your eyeballs.
Yeah, I'm getting a battery alert here. We're back.
We are back and in business. I'm trying to think. We were just talking about the tanks that you guys heard fire up. Now, as far as I know, you guys hadn't heard tanks before. So all of a sudden you're hearing tanks. You're like, WTF over?
Oh, at least, yeah. Because it was shortly after Spider told us, to get the high ground. Because we want the team to survive, get the high ground, and just remain vigilant for any trackers, etc. And then we heard the tank start further up the mountain, and it was like, oh man. So, and again, we weren't thinking about the fact that this is the first time anybody reported tanks since the battle at Lang Vay earlier in the year, up at the aid camp that got hit during the Tet Offensive, up near the DMZ, close to the Laos border. So that just told us we had to move. We moved out of there. We crossed the trail, and then we E&E'd for the remainder of that afternoon And again, it was November, so it got dark earlier, and they were coming at us looking for us. By that time, we could hear the dogs down the mountain, and people coming up the mountain looking for us. Whereas on the trail, when we first set up the wiretap, people were walking up and down the trail with their AKs on their shoulders, very casual. And within 2 or 3 hours, there was a lot of activity on the trail. So we crossed it again, and then went as far away the opposite direction from the LZ. And as it got dark, Sal climbed up the tree, and he looked back down where they were coming from, and he said there were dogs. We could hear the dogs. A lot of dogs and people with lanterns that were coming up that mountain looking for us. And we got into like a little brook, and we walked up that brook for a while, put out false trails on each side, and then we put down powdered mace and black pepper, so if the dogs hit it with their nose, it would foul their nose. And we did this into the dark, but I knew that they were coming at us, and then Sal agreed that we should stay in this little brook or a little, whatever it was, a creek, and then set up an RON for the night, which we did. And we set up the RON. We went up a little embankment, maybe 12 feet or so, I forget. And then we set up the RON, and then I was facing the creek bed. And then the other 17 members were circled around behind me.
Was that the same mission that the guy touched your boot?
That's the same one. That was the night.
Well, there was a whole lot going on that mission. Holy cow.
Oh, yeah. It was really something because later that night, I mean, we could see some of the lanterns down the hills, and there was one of the NVA, there's two of them, and one carried a lantern and went past us in that little creek, and they're heading up the creek bed. And then they ran out of gas or fuel for the lantern. They turned around and came back. And when they walked past us, Hef coughed. And so the one NVA, that's when he crawled up that embankment towards me, because that's where I was facing. And I just sat there with my feet spread and my Car 15 between my feet. And had I heard any noise, I would have fired one or two single shots. But this guy was really good. He only moved when the wind blew. And he finally got up to me, and he touched my boot. And when he touched my boot, I heard him catch his breath. And then he waited, and when the wind blew, he backed down that hill, and then the embankment, and then he and his buddy left. And at first light, we were out of there. We could chain up the mountain. We moved all day climbing that huge mountain. And we finally got up there right about last light. And it was a rigorous climb, and we were all beat. And that night was when we saw the Russians do an aerial resupply in Laos. We picked them up on FM radio, and we called for TAC Air, but we couldn't get anybody. It would have been nice to have shot down that Russian airplane over Laos.
I don't know if it was that the time. Didn't you see like lights off in the distance in the jungle too, or something?
Yeah, that's where a couple of mountain ranges away, when we were listening to the radio, Bubba came over to me and goes, "Look at that." And where we were on top of the mountain, we had to walk around the peak of where we were, and this whole mountainside just lit up. It looked like Broadway. It was so bright. And that was what they were using for their drop zone, for them to fly over with an airplane and drop supplies to them in Laos. And that was just, and again, we called the Air Force, but we couldn't get a hold of anybody when that plane was in the area. Then as soon as that plane left, all the lights went out. But it was so strange to be in the middle of the jungle and to see it light up like Broadway.
Right. And again, going back to even the luminescent wristwatch face, any light in the jungle seems to go forever and really stick out. You guys had
Absolutely.
Yeah, and you guys had formal debriefs too. So did Do you know if anybody ever tried to follow up on that location and do any missions out in that area to see if they could find it?
That's a good question. I don't know. They didn't come to us if they did, and we were so busy running. And then at that point, it was a little bit later that our team was sent TDY, temporary duty, down to FOB 6, because in 68 we had 6 FOBs. FOB 1 was up north, FOB 3 was Quezon, and when they closed Quezon, they started another little base called Mylock. And it was basically a launch site, and we had teams up there. And then FOB 2 was Khartoum, which was down in 2 Corps. FOB 4, which was an I Corps in Da Nang. FOB 5 was Bami Tuat, which was further south, but north of Saigon. And then Honak Tao was FOB 6, which was just northwest of Saigon by maybe 20, 25 miles.
Yeah, you guys had a whole bunch of FOBs until they consolidated them.
Right, and they consolidated at the end of December 68, January 69. So it'd be CCN, which was Da Nang, CCC, Khartoum, and then CCS, which was out of Bami Tuat. And Bami Tuat ran all the missions into Cambodia, where CCC did both Laos and Cambodia, the tri-border area, and then CCN was all north, just Laos, the DMZ, and then for bright light missions for down pilots into North Vietnam.
Did you ever run any? I know when we talked, you mentioned, you guys did DMZ missions and you considered that across the fence because that was outside of friendly territory. But did you ever run any missions into actual North Vietnam, like recon missions?
No, we had a couple of bright lights. One bright light was into North Vietnam for down pilot. It got canceled before we even launched. Another time we launched and we're en route. We were in North Vietnam airspace, and before we got to the down pilot, we were called back, and I forget why. So that was my only experience over North Vietnam. Nothing on the ground.
So as you've created a lot of problems for me, because I've lost a lot of sleep because all the stuff I hear you talk about, I have to research it. So I've been up late doing research and listening to other, podcast episodes with some of the other guys, and the only thing I could rationally come up with was the air to air in North, I mean, the ground to air missiles and surface to air missiles in North Vietnam was much greater of a risk than Laos and everywhere else until Johnson stopped the air bombing. So the only thing I could come up with when I had been doing this research was they must have, I assume they realized the risk to the air resources was too great and turned everybody around.
I wouldn't make that assumption.
Okay.
There may have been another reason, something to do with the people on the ground, or Jolly Green Giant was able to get in before we got there. Because more than once, they would launch a bright light with us, but the Jolly Greens would also launch out of either Da Nang or come out of Thailand. And so that would be a longer flight for them. So whoever got there first to help the pilot would get the first attempt to get on the ground. After the bombing halt, that's when the NVA began moving a lot of their anti-aircraft artillery south.
Right.
Because it was just ridiculous. And, even Operation Tailwind, which was conducted in southern Laos and this is September 1970, they had anti-aircraft ACAC, just like World War II. And we had testimony from our guys that were there, just amazed. It felt like deja vu watching a World War II movie with the ACAC.
Yeah, that's kind of crazy. And I've seen even Mugia Pass, which was the very narrow portion where the Ho Chi Minh Trail crossed over, I think from North Vietnam into Laos, correct?
Yeah, there was a trail that came down in through Laos and the Mugia Pass, and there was another pass, I forget its name. But there are two major passes that really narrowed the traffic. And that's where they received a lot of attention from the Air Force. And we even had a mission that was targeted to go in there to set up on one of the ridges and to go in with artillery and go in with clear weather. So we could have done TAC air to back up the traffic there. But even that mission got canceled literally when we had crossed over the DMZ River. We had flying north to go to Mugi, and they pulled us back. And I don't know why. They told us, but I forget.
Okay,
It
because
may have been an aircraft that had gotten shot down near that AO.
I think Dick Thompson had mentioned something that they they had learned that there was a lot of anti-air resources in that area, so they were like, nope, we can't. It's no longer safe for anybody to go in there. That's what I believe I remember from him and Jocko.
Yeah, we'll have to talk to Dick a little bit about it. But we were scheduled to go in April of '69, and there was anti-aircraft, but there was a way to get around it, particularly if you went in at low level, because they couldn't get their weaponry down to a certain level, like if you could in a nap of the earth kind of thing,
Right.
But we never got on the ground, so we'll never know.
And I should have. I had a question and a follow up, and I should have written it down, and I did not. Oh, the whole reason I brought up Mugia Pass was that I've seen pictures of where there are F4 parts in that area. So I guess they had some pretty significant um, anti-air resources there, where they were able to actually shoot down F4s. But
Oh yeah.
that just talks about the severity of or the difficulty of the target areas you guys operated in. I mean, they weren't just shooting down helicopters; they're shooting down fast movers and everything.
Oh yeah. Yes, sir. That was the. We lost a lot of good aviators, and the Air Force paid a price. I mean, the Air Force guys that did the bombing missions over Hanoi and North Vietnam. I mean, look at all of the airmen that were shot down, both Navy and Air Force. And then further south into Laos, the everything from the Jolly Green Giants to A-1 Sky Raiders to fast movers, they were always on the lookout for the anti-aircraft artillery. That's for sure.
I want to go back. Did you go to the 1-0 course?
No, they had some in-country training at Camp Duck, but Camp Duck got overrun in early May of '68, and there was a couple of months there where they had no formal 1-0 training within SOG. And at the end of '68, they put together the 1-0 course at Long Time. And the lieutenant that put it together was Travis Mills. He had been shot 5 times on August 23rd, 1968, when FOB-4 was overrun by sappers, NVA sappers. But the SF men in there held out for the night, and we lost 16 Green Berets that night. It was the most highest loss of special forces in our history since 1952. And Travis, he was still recuperating from his many wounds, but he went down and put together a long time. And they had been doing some other operations out of there previous. And so the 1-0 school, and it was really a lot of guys that attended, liked it. They learned a lot from it. In my case, they wanted me to go, but Spider went in and said, look, Tilt's had all these missions already. He doesn't need it. And we need a team that's operational. So that got me out of going to the 1-0 school.
And I was just curious, like what the whole reason I asked was what does a 1-0 course consist of? Like, what are they teaching? I assume they're taking 1-1s or 1-2s, or so for the listening audience, a 1-0 is the team leader, the 1-1 is the assistant team leader, and the 1-2 is typically the radio operator or just the third American. Because in your case, as the team leader, you carried the radio, but
Always, yeah. Myself and a lot of the other 1-0s did that. So this is like, it's more training for anybody running SOG recon, and they call it the SOG 1-0 school. And it was everything from rappelling, intel briefings, latest techniques, and just running missions. They would run a live mission somewhere in South Vietnam, or sometimes they would go across the border, across the fence into Cambodia or Laos and run an actual mission as part of their training. So they would get, on the job training. I mean, there are people that died in going through that 1-0 school. Some people died at the rappelling. Others were wounded or killed on the training missions that they ran. Quote, training missions where they ran into either VC or NVA.
wow. And they call it a training mission.
Yeah, exactly.
That's crazy. Because I thought it was interesting when I was reading Across the Fence where there was a quote unquote training mission, and it seemed like it was near the beach. But I mean, I always felt like if you're outside of the friendly lines, the way that war was fought was there's really, if you're outside of friendly lines, I mean, you're literally in enemy territory. So is it a training mission? It's like you might have some training aspects to it, but it's real. The threat is real.
Well, yeah, and they had that whole training mission with Lynn Black in Alabama when they were over to Hong Tre Island, which was off the coast, and they were there, and they ran into a good sized element of Viet Cong and NVA combined that pushed them off the mountain, and they were right up against the South China Sea, and Lynn had luckily had a frequency for Navy gunships, like I call them PT, like the PT 109, but the Navy has another term for it. But it's some kind of a gunship that had quad 50 calibers on them, and he was able to call them, and they came and literally rescued ST Alabama, and they pulled him out of Hon Tre Island there at the South China Sea, and they had to walk out to get on
The boat.
that watercraft. I forget. I'm not familiar with too many Navy terminologies.
Yeah,
But
and I don't recall what boats they had there too, but that was what I was remembering. I remember somebody had gone and ran into it, and then now that you say that, that was the story I was remembering because now I do remember that. Yeah, he was saved by a naval boat. It didn't matter where you get. That's where when you say safe house, I'm like, how safe is a safe house when you're surrounded by the enemy? You know, in a combat zone, it's different. Like if you say, oh, we have a safe house in Moscow. Okay, we're not in combat. We're not at war with Russia. So a safe house could, as long as it's not compromised, it's a safe house. However, if you're in South Vietnam and it's not inside of friendly lines and you're telling me the house is safe, my question is, well, how safe is this house?
Well, they had House 22 in Da Nang, and House 10 was in Saigon. And the few times that I stayed at each, they were very safe. And, you could relax a little bit. And they always had good food.
How trustworthy, and this is where my lack of trust in the human race kicks in, where I mean, how obviously the South Vietnamese knew about these houses. So were were you guys confident that South Vietnamese weren't telling the VC or the NVA that the house was a quote unquote safe house?
You know, I never thought about it much. We just talked to the other guys who had been there, and the question was, well, the safe house, how safe is it? Well, it's pretty safe. And they had, I think they had known security guards that were trained up, and they're just trustworthy. And they kept vigilance 24 hours a day.
How much did you guys always look over your shoulder anytime you left the wire?
Always. Always on swivel. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because that was the thing about Vietnam. You know, trained like, well, the enemy could be there plowing the fields by day and trying to kill you by night. So always keep an eye out. And, oh, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean,
And
go ahead.
that was one of the double-edged swords about guerrilla warfare. You know, it's like you could be just doing a water run and get shot up doing a water run, taking a water back to FOB1, you know?
I mean, my dad was saying when, again, obviously I wasn't there, but when he would say that their rules of engagement were, if they saw VC out there, and that was a term he used, VC. He said we could see them carrying rifles, but we weren't allowed to engage them unless they were shooting at them.
Imagine.
Yeah.
How crazy is that?
Yeah. He once told me, and so he once told me way back in the 80s when I had come home. I want to say, no, was it 87? It might have been 87. I came home on leave in 87. It might have been actually in 88 one time I was home on a weekend, but because I was stationed at Lejeune at that point. But he was like, had they removed the rules of engagement, we could have won that war in 6 months. And I'm like, nah, okay. I mean, I'm not disagreeing with him, but I don't know anything really about it at that time. But after having listened to you guys more and more, and the different guests you've had on, and some of them saying how close the war was to being actually won at one point before they scaled it back, I'm like, well, maybe he might have been right. I mean, it sounds like we knew they lost the Tet Offensive. They got hammered hard, but I'm wondering, is that even something that can be won just because you're always going to be fighting a guerrilla warfare fight?
Well, the Viet Cong, the locals were just devastated, and they were never really an effective fighting unit again. There may have been one or two small Viet Cong units that survived the Tet and continued to raise hell. But had we fought that like World War II to win, and there are other scholars, all of whom you basically get ignored by the media, of course, that argue that had we blockaded Haiphong Harbor and just told China, we're not at war with you, but anything in North Vietnam coming south, once it's in Vietnam, we're going to blow it up. And then cut off Haiphong Harbor, and then the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And the Ho Chi Minh Trail, particularly in the early days, could have been cut and backed up the supplies, and then the supplies backed up, have the Air Force and the Navy come in and just blow up anything that's on the trail. Oversimplified, but to really go at it with an effort to win, not to have our hands tied by politicians.
Yeah, that seemed to be the biggest problem right there. Going back to the dogs and the tracking,
Yeah.
there was specifically, I need to find it real quick, and maybe it's further down. But you were, at one point in the book, you were talking about how they were tracking you faster than you could move. And I was pretty shocked because I know that you guys use the Indige people as your, you call it tail gunner, we called it tail end Charlie, to cover your tracks. And those guys were still tracking you faster than you could move, even with covering your tracks. Was that just they were that good at what they were doing?
There were some that were good. There's no question about it. But in our case, there are so many different times with each mission that the situation with the trackers would be so dramatically different. I mean, sometimes they would have dogs, they wouldn't. Other times they would just do nothing but signal shots. And again, sometimes it would be them just trying to figure out what was going on. Like, did you see, like they would have their signals back and forth to each other. Have you seen anything yet? They've, you know, we were told that they would have combo between each other, but it would be very simplistic, not like with radios or anything, particularly if they just use some of their local indig who were forced to look for us. And then if they found us, then they would turn to go back to the NVA. And then you had NVA trackers. You also had the North Vietnamese sapper units that were trained up. They began doing that at the end of 67, early 68. We had intel briefings where they were training sappers to hunt and track down our SOG teams on the ground. And then when they made contact, to kill the Americans, but to leave the indigenous troops alive for PSYOP purposes. And that happened a few times.
Now, did you?
And of course, it was sappers that hit FOB4 on August 26, 1968, when we lost 16 Green Berets.
Did you guys know at the time that they had created sapper units just to come after you guys? Or was that later?
Yeah, that was part of our intel briefing. It was like, be advised, there are now sapper units out there. Yeah, and we had a team that was on the ground on January 1st, 69, and they got hit at first light by a sapper team. And they killed all three of the Americans.
Was that when did they leave the Indige people alive on that one?
Yep.
One of the questions I had was, and I was curious, was there ever any question that the Indige people were part of it, or did you guys trust them well enough that you didn't think that they walked the team into an ambush?
Oh, that never was an issue with our team. Never. And the majority of the recon teams, RSF guys got close with the indigenous personnel. That was not a concern. And with our team, it was never a concern. Because we had three guys who were born in North Vietnam. They came south with their families after Dien Bien Phu fell, when the French were finally ousted in May of 1954. And they came south. There was a period of 18 months where people could go south, and anybody in the south could go north. And they divided Vietnam on the 17th parallel, and thousands of people went south. Very few went north, if anybody, because nobody wanted to live under communism. They knew that the government in South Vietnam may have been corrupt. It was, no question. But they preferred, and this is what the guys on my team told me, is that we prefer living under a corrupt government that we know rather than be under the thumb of communism. And that was just one of those facts of life.
I want to go back to being compromised, because when we talked last night, you had mentioned that, and I had read it. I want to say I read it in your book, and I heard it on one of the podcast episodes too, where there was a woman on the radio that was calling the team out by each individual name of each individual team member. And you had talked about...
That was Dick Thompson.
Well, and you had specifically mentioned, because we were talking about POW camps and POW missions, and you had mentioned that it was on one of those too that the person came out on the radio and mentioned the team members by name.
Right. Now, with Dick Thompson, what made his case really extraordinary was that he had the PRC-77, and he had the encryption device attached. And a woman's voice came up. We assume it was Hanoi Hannah. who was the propaganda gal from North Vietnam, and she came up and said, Lieutenant Thompson, Dick Thompson, and only two people knew that Dick went by the nickname of Dick. At that time, we all knew him as Henry, but his cousin and his good friend Eldon Bargewell were the ones that called him Dick. And that gal said, Lieutenant Dick Thompson. And that was amazing.
Was that when they told? There was one in particular where she came over the radio and they keyed up the radio after she said what she was saying and said, F you or fuck you, come and get me.
That was Lynn Black.
Oh, that was Lynn. Okay. I remember somebody
time.
said
Yep.
that. I couldn't remember who.
Yep, that was one of those deals where Lynn, they came up on the radio. The Frenchman was the radio operator for that mission. And a voice came up and said, RT Idaho, we know where you are and we're going to come get you. And the Frenchman at first, he was just amazed at it was going on. So that conversation, so Lynn came up and said, who are you talking to? And it turned out that that they were talking to the NVA, and then one guy was a Cuban apparently, and they had to chat back and forth, and then Lynn and those guys knew where they were in the valley, but they couldn't get any attack air, and so they just had to drop it, and then the Cuban goes, "We know where you are," and Lynn goes, "Well, here's my coordinates. Come and get me." And that was where that one famous quote came from.
When you guys came back with that, like with the Russian resupply, assuming that there was a Cuban there and those two NVA people that you saw might have actually been Chinese. When you were being debriefed, did the Intel guys ever ask you to try to pinpoint the locations so that they could go back and try to find those locations or no?
Yeah, of course. And sometimes if they had a big enough enemy troops there, they would come back and then try to go in for calling an arc light on them, you know?
Did they ever send in? I know you guys had Hatchet Force teams. Did they ever send Hatchet Force teams after them?
They had one or two like that that would be in the early days, yes.
I feel like that. I feel like that's such actionable intelligence, and I know when you guys did bright light missions, you basically stripped everything off. You just had your, I assume, your web gear. You just carried basically munitions with you. Going back to the 90 pounds of your gear, how much on a, say, an area recon, a 5 day mission for you, how much water did you take with you? Because I remember you saying you mostly took water purification tablets, but how much water did you carry?
Well, it would depend on the AO, you know? If it had water in it with streams or creeks or things that we could use, then we just take one, maybe two canteens, and then just fill them up. And then other times, if there were no visible streams or creeks, then we would go back and carry more canteens, more water if we had to. But it was just added weight, so it was always a question of weight.
I mean, the most I've carried is 9 quarts of water before, so I was just curious what you guys were carrying. Because
Yeah.
I had 4 canteens on my belt, and then I had a 5 quart water bladder that I strapped to the back side of the Alice pack in between the frame and the pack itself, or between the
Wow.
frame and me. And then
Right.
that's what I had. So I had literally 9 quarts of water on me.
Wow.
Your Thanksgiving Day mission, I kind of take that as one of the biggest missions you had when you were in Vietnam. And
Oh yeah.
that was CCC, correct? Central?
No, no. It's the FOB 6, the furthermost base we had at that time. This is November '68,
Mm-hmm.
and um, the mission was to find the 1st, the 3rd, and the 7th NVA divisions. They had 30,000 NVA that were in Cambodia that the CIA and everybody lost contact with. They didn't know where they were. And at first, I thought when we went in for the briefing, I thought the colonel was kidding. Like 3 NVA divisions or MIA. So, and we were sent down TDY because they were having a shortage of recon teams at that point in time. So we were down there, and when it came time for that mission, we got the full briefing, and I went back that night with the CEO in the S3 shop, and we looked at photos, and we looked at other intel reports, and we estimated where it would be the best location to go. And so that was where we went in for our primary LZ. We had the Air Force 20th Special Operations Squadron. They had the state-of-the-art UE, the fastest ones. They were faster than any ones that we had seen with the Army up north. They had miniguns on their gunships, which was a UE with a gunship, armored. And they were just incredible. And they inserted us. We're on the ground, and we literally walked into an NVA base camp where it appeared as though one division had just moved out and another one was coming in. And there were still fires that were burning. I think they had one fire still had a pot or something over it. And then the NVA came back. We had the NVA. I'll never forget. They had their pith helmets and their AK-47s. And we could see them in the distance coming back into the base camp from the south. And then there were some that came in from the north. And we went back to the primary LZ. We called the Prairie Fire Emergency. And those gunships got there post-haste. And we were able to work the gunships. And as we moved back, we used our Claymores, M79. And that's where we used the Claymores with the 5-second fuses on them. Put the fuse in. Well, the fuse would be in already.
Right.
And put it in and then keep moving. And 5 seconds later, that thing would go off. And that slowed them down enough that we were able to get back to the primary LZ. And they came in and they pulled us out. And even as we're leaving, guys were coming out of the jungle. Now, there we saw them. And there was the one guy, I'll never forget it. He came out because he had been in the jungle and he broke through and he saw us. And it had been raining, I guess, the night before. It was still damp. And he tried to stop, and you could see him kicking up clumps of mud going up into the helicopter blade. And he's trying to bring his AK down. Well, the door gunner and myself hit this guy. He stopped him and just picked him up and blew him back into the jungle. And there were a couple others that burst through as we lifted off. So that was Thanksgiving Day. And we had Thanksgiving dinner before we went in on the mission. The CO promised us a dinner. So we had it.
You had 3 dinners that day.
Yeah. Then after the mission, we went back to the Air Force Base. They gave us dinner. And then we got back to FOB-6, and then we briefed the colonel and his S3 shop. And they were like so impressed. He said, "Hey, let's go have dinner now." So we had 3 Thanksgiving Day dinners on Thanksgiving.
But
just for the record, to show you how bad Cambodia was at that time, 2 days before that, we had a recon team that got in trouble, and the 20th Special Operations Squadron, the Green Hornets, they had 5 helicopters that went out to pick up the recon team, and 4 of them were seriously damaged. They had to return to base, and the last helicopter was able to get to the team, and it hovered near a little finger of a land that went out into this little stream or something. Anyways, the pilot from that mission on November 26th, he earned a Medal of Honor that day from the Green Hornets. And then 2 days later, we had our mission where the Green Hornets just saved our bacon. Had they been delayed much longer, we would have been history.
Was that another one where you basically expended all of your ammo and grenades and everything?
No, I went through a lot, and we used more of the M79 rounds because it was open, and we could really hit them as they were coming further back, And we had Tuan with us, our grenadier. So between me and Bubba and Tuan and the Claymores, and then when the 20th came in with their gun runs, that's what saved us as we moved back to the LZ.
So I guess that area, even at FOB6, the jungle was still pretty thick, because I remember some people, you had a guest on the SOGcast, I forget who it was now, that talked about the area of Cambodia he went to, and he described it as being like in the forest of Virginia. It was a very similar terrain and vegetation.
Yeah, Cambodia had extremes. And in the case that we were in, you could see the 300 to 400 yards away, maybe a little longer. It was thin, not even a full one canopy of jungle. But there are parts further north towards Laos, on the tri-border area of Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam, that they had severe jungle, triple canopy. But depending where you are. So this target was out of FOB6. It was further south in Cambodia, and the jungle there was more open. And we ran 2 more missions out of there. And we got on the ground. We didn't have a complete mission, but that's another whole story.
You got on the ground for all 3 missions then?
Yeah, and the second one, we were on the ground. They pulled us out because there had been a complaint from Premier Sihanouk from Cambodia, because we had used a white phosphorus grenade on Thanksgiving Day against the enemy, and the United States was forbidden to use white phosphorus grenades. They had no TAC air in Cambodia in 1968. No fast movers, no SPADs, nothing. Just helicopter gunships, and they were good. We had the 195th. That was the Army unit, and then, of course, the Green Hornets that were down there for that full tour of duty. And they were just amazing air crews, like all of our American air crews.
But the white phosphorus was actually you, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was me.
So when you got back, how much trouble did you get in for that?
Well, the CO pulled me in and goes, we had this protest. That's why we pulled you out. What the hell happened? I said, on the record, for the record, sir, I said the white phosphorus fell off my web gear, and I'm sorry that it landed down there on those poor little NVA that were trying to kill us. And I said, but between you and I, sir, I pulled that pin on that thing and dumped it on those guys because we were just barely got out of there alive. And he covered for me. He stood by us, gave him the cover story.
And then the third one, you guys got in as well. And how did that go?
Well, we got inserted, and we had an ambush set up on a highway there. I think it was like Highway 31 or Highway 33 in Cambodia on the eastern border. And Bubba had put in a landmine, so we were going to blow up a truck. And it was one of those deals where the jungle was like really intense vegetation up to the road. And then there was the road, and on the other side there were fields. And when they had trucks coming down there, cars, all kinds of motorcycles and things like this, and we could take the camera. Whenever a truck came by with NVA troops, we were taking pictures of these trucks. And so we were going to blow up one, get a prisoner of war and then take him back to Saigon for interrogation. But they pulled us out later in the morning. And the reason why they pulled us out was we had a King bee that went down November 30th, 1968. We had a King bee that went down with 7 Green Berets and the helicopter crew. They were doing an eldest son mission. They were flying to a target in Laos to insert eldest son ordnance. And the helicopter was struck by anti-aircraft artillery. And then it crashed and it killed everybody. And we lost 7 Green Berets, so they had to call us back to Fubai because that really hurt the manpower level there.
Wow. How often did they have to ship or rotate teams around to cover the different FOBs due to?
That's a good question. That's a good question, Dave. I don't know. It happened a few times. I know that in July, like John Walton with ST Louisiana, they were TDY down to Khartoum for a while at FOB2. And some of the FOB4 teams would come up and they'd run some of our targets. And it just depended on the weather, how many teams were available, and then what they would be able to do. Just how things unfolded at that time, Dave.
Seemed like a very dynamic situation all the time, you know?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I had never heard the term strap hanger until I started reading your books, and I was like, what in the world is a strap hanger? That's the one term I had to look up in the glossary because I had no idea what it was.
Oh, yeah.
Going back to the very beginning when I was saying the reason I was reaching out was, you know, hearing you guys doing your fish hooks or your dog legs into your RONs, that translated directly into what we were doing in the 80s that we had been taught. And then hearing some of the issues where you guys were being inserted in places that weren't where you wanted to go, I was able, as a team leader, to be able to get up and stand at the back of the cockpit between the two pilots and talk to them about where I wanted to go, which was also nice for a couple of reasons. One, if I could confirm my LZ, and even if I needed to go to a different LZ, I knew exactly where I was. So when we got out of the bird, if nobody else knew, if we were at a different LZ, at least, you know, when we moved 10 minutes away and stopped, if everything checked out, I could brief my team members. I was like, look, we actually got inserted here, so now this is where we're at, and this is our new route, you know?
Right.
So that was the kind of thing that started to make a little bit of sense, and the fact that you guys were so compromised in Vietnam, you know, we were told not to turn in our locations with our patrol orders and stuff like that. So it was really interesting the dots being connected and how those lessons were actually learned.
Well, yeah, and don't forget your rope extractions.
Yeah. I mean,
from the jungle. Yeah.
Yeah, and the
propelling in, getting extracted out.
Yes, and like you guys coming out on strings, they ended up creating the whole spy rig. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but in the 80s, they had this whole system where they would drop a rope that was specifically designed that had D-rings all on it, and they would issue us this harness that we would strap onto us. So it was much more comfortable because it was an upper body and through the leg contraption, and it had a strap above our head, and we would put a snap link on it, hook that into the D-ring, and then so the strap is connected to your back, and you could literally, if you needed to shoot, you could shoot. But that whole harness took all the weight, and you weren't trying to hang in some weird particular way in a Swiss seat.
Was that a stable rig?
No, it was a little bit. I'll have to send you an image of it, but I even
Yeah.
actually have some pictures in an album of spy rigging. So I'll have to scan that in and send it to you too. It's just it's your rope extract that you got your string extract, but with a more permanent rope, and actually it was a harness specifically designed for it. You still had
Wow.
this. You still had the same issue where if the pilot wasn't careful, you could be drugged. So we still had a
Right.
few issues like that. So, but it was much better. Well, John, I want to thank you for coming on. This has been a wonderful conversation, especially for me historically, everything that I did and where we learned it from. So, for sure.
Indeed.
And it's still amazing to me that you guys went out and conducted these missions where, for a lot of us, I've heard Jocko say it and other people, it seemed like suicide missions, and you guys were able to get in and get out intact, shockingly.
Indeed. We were very fortunate. No question about it, Dave.
Absolutely, I agree. So thank
Oh,
you for
yeah.
your service and doing that, because that's freaking nuts.
Yeah, and thank you for all you've done. 9 years of a long tour of duty there, both as a sniper and running recon.
Yeah, but I didn't have people shooting at me the whole time, or most of the time. So
Yeah,
that's completely different, you know?
a little different. Yes, sir.
Yeah, for sure. A little different, a lot different. Well, again, thank you for coming on. I greatly appreciate it. I have enjoyed the conversation. Hopefully, if when I'll be getting back to Tennessee at some point, being from Virginia. But it'd be
Right.
nice to have a coffee with you sometime and sit down and just chat.
All right, Dave. Let me know.
Will do. You have a great day. Thank you very much.
Likewise, and thank you for the time. I appreciate it.